Hello, I'm Sarah Jacobs, and I'm here to tell you about the work that I have made over the last year. I'm also going to talk to you about some of the commonalities I find in that work and about goals that I have made to improve my work moving forward based on those tendencies that I noted. So as I mentioned, I'll start by showing you some of the work I've made this year. This is a piece that I made with a computer algorithm created by Prahlad Menon. We input the word sunset into the algorithm. It searched the internet for what people believe that word means based on tags that they put on photographs and created the gradients in this. I designed the composition and the computer created the colors and the gradients. And then on top of that, that created the base. On top of that, I painted the patterns and I painted the big yellow flowers coming up throughout the middle in oil. This is a piece that I made to experiment with 3 dimensions. A couple of parts of it were made 3-dimensional with molding paste. I like the idea of things looking 3-dimensional that are actually flat, but I thought it'd be fun to make something that's actually 3-dimensional too and see if it would look flat from the front. This is a piece that I made this year earlier when the lockdown happened because of the pandemic. You can see that it has a more melancholy tone. There are lots of spaces. There aren't patterns everywhere like in most of my work. There are lots of spaces to kind of rest the eye. It's called screens because I have all these floating white rectangles that are reminiscent of the way that kind of saw everything through rectangles that year, through Zoom, looking out the window, watching things on YouTube, not actually being able to go places. And then I wanted to, make something a little bit more cheerful, so I decided to start doing portraits of people looking happy, and I'm calling this series The Carnival, because when I was a kid, a carnival came to town every year during the summer, and it was there for a week, and all the kids were very excited to go back out and be social and see each other at the carnival after we'd missed each other all summer long. And so I was thinking that this is what it would be like, eventually. And so while in quarantine, we're making this series. This is a self-portrait. It's called Oh, I Feel Ya. It sounds like Ophelia because it's based on this painting of Ophelia, a character from Hamlet, drowning. This painting is by John Everett Millay, and it hangs in the Tate Britain. So you can see a little bit of similarities. This is a woman coming out of water, but in my version, kind of happily frolicking in the water, as opposed to drowning like Ophelia did. Here you can see that one might get the reference from the Millay painting because I designed a repeating pattern that I have in my water that is based on the flowers in his painting. In this next piece, I have my model here looking very happy, kind of sleeping in. And in this piece, I designed the pattern of these flowers to relate to the personality of the person in the painting. So you can see I designed these, you can see the original painting of the orchid that was part of the painting I showed you earlier, screens. I also designed 2 new flowers that I painted on watercolor, and then I digitally combined them in Photoshop to make the pattern that I had printed on cotton, which I wrapped around the model. And then I had a photograph of the fabric wrapped around him, printed on canvas against the flat version of the pattern that I made in Photoshop. I also then painted him into the painting. So the parts that are skin and hair are oil paint, and the rest is printed. And in this piece, it's a portrait of another artist. Her name is Linda Schrank, and she often takes some of her old paintings, puts them into Photoshop, and alters them to create prints. And so here I did something similar in this because it's an ode to her in a way. And so I took 2 of my previous paintings, one that included tiger lilies and one that has most of the patterns in the background, and combined them, cut them in Photoshop. And I also designed a new pattern, the fall leaves pattern. I painted onto watercolor and then created a digital pattern out of it after I digitized it. And so the part that is painted is, again, the skin and the hair of the person. The rest is printed and designed in Photoshop. And this is a portrait of an adorable little girl, and I called it the new Colossus because she looks a bit like the Statue of Liberty in the way that she's standing and the way the sheet is wrapped around her. And I printed the sheet, the pattern onto cotton again in order to create the wrap around her. So the painted part is again her and lots of the highlights on the patterns. I designed 2 new patterns for this, one of crocuses that are purple and one forsythia, springtime colors, springtime flowers. So in this part of the lecture, I'm going to identify some similarities that I find across the work that I've made over the past year, and then talk about what I've learned from that and whether I think I'm going to continue in that direction or use what I've noticed to design a path forward. So I'll talk about my goals. So a similarity that I've noticed across this work is I've been using lots of blue and yellow over the past year and very few other colors, a little bits of green in here and there, but I've been very blue and yellow. So you can see on the left side, those 4 paintings are quite, including the Ophelia, are quite blue. The one above it, third from the left on the top, is yellow and blue, and the 2 on the right are very, very yellow. And so I'm realizing that I have a tendency towards these colors, and I should absolutely expand my color repertoire. And so a goal for my next piece will be to incorporate different colors besides just sticking to blue and yellow. I also noticed something. I'm going to mostly focus on the portraits because they're the more recent work in terms of setting goals. And so I noticed in the portraits that the compositions are quite, they're quite full. There's nowhere to rest the eye. Earlier in the year, I made a piece, that screens piece, you can see in the bottom left, and in that one I left lots of spaces for the eye to rest, which is not something that I normally do. And I just kind of abandoned that and gone back to the more is more, everything everywhere kind of mentality. And I am noticing also that my figures are all in the middle. I need to vary that more. And so in my next piece, I'm going to maybe leave some places where that, maybe not in my next, some of the pieces moving forward, I'm going to leave places for the eye to rest. I'm certainly going to pay attention to not center quite as much as I have been with my focal points. I also noticed that when I moved into the portrait series, I just kind of threw out this concept I had earlier of making 3-dimensional artwork. I sort of threw out the baby with the bathwater on in this issue as well, and completely forgot about that goal that I had set earlier in the year. And so I do want to go back to including some molding paste and creating some 3-dimensional elements in some of these pieces. Oh, I'm sorry, my face is over this, but it said portrait emotions and portrait mood. Okay, so first I want to talk about the emotions of the people in the portraits. I noticed they're all happy, which is what I'm going for here. I want it to be a happy scene, but thinking about this idea of what it's going to be like when everything opens up again, or what it was like going to the carnival. Just because you're at the carnival doesn't necessarily mean everybody's happy. Lots of you see these kids crying at the carnival all the time too. And I think I should have mostly happy people in this series because that is the main concept, but I do maybe want to have a little bit more variety in that. People who are kind of happy in different ways, or people, maybe even one where somebody is kind of crying or not having fun, not having fun at the fair. And I included the past work from much earlier in the year to compare to the moods of the overall paintings of the portraits. You can see that some of my earlier work this year was some of it's sad and some of it's just a little eerie. Even the one on the far right, the one that I worked with an algorithm in another place with the yellow flowers, that one, it's fairly happy, but it also is a little bit eerie. And I would describe the one that's a little bit 3-dimensional too, the one called Flat Broke, a little bit eerie. And the orchid was very melancholy, and so I do want maybe not to just be so utterly happy in the portraits mood. All right. So in this lecture, I showed you the work that I've made over the last year. I've identified commonalities, and I've created a number of goals, including things like varying my colors, maybe varying the emotions, not being so centered in my composition and leaving places for the eye to rest. And so moving forward, I am going to keep those in mind when designing my future artwork. Okay, so this is a recap of what I just did. That was an example of what I want you to do in the lecture, and I did time it. It was at 10 minutes. So I do want you to keep your lecture to 6 to 9 minutes, so I was just a little bit over. And I do, another little difference in your lectures, you should show work from the last 2 years or so. I mean, I'm a fine artist, so I'm constantly making work, and so I just wanted to stick to this past year. But this is sophomore review. You're welcome to look at all the work that you've done over the last 2 years. And if there is anything really influential that you did towards the end of high school, you could include that too. So in this lecture, you are going to be doing what I did. You'll be starting off by introducing, having an introductory image like I had, and explaining to the viewer what this whole lecture is about. And so you will be starting by saying, hello, I'm going to show you, I'm so-and-so. In this lecture, I'm going to show you my work that I've made over the last couple of years. I'm going to identify kind of tendencies that I have in the work, and I'm going to evaluate whether those things are working for me or whether I should move in another direction if it's taught me something. And then you're going to tell us what those goals are. Once you've done that for each of these sets, then you will have a conclusion where you just basically recap what you've done. And you say thank you very much, and that will be the end of your lecture. All right.